Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts Podcast. We are so excited to have you with us here today.
Yes, we are. I am excited for another conversation. This time it's a little bit different. We're talking to one of the practitioners at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, Kim Johnson. She does incredible work, and we are going to be talking about purity culture and how Eastern tradition practices, things like yoga and other body-based practices, breathwork, chakras, can be a resource for us in healing. Yeah, and I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah. I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting lens, a really interesting way to approach this,
Mhm.
especially in light of those of us who came out of, high control, fundamentalist Christian
Yeah.
backgrounds who usually had
Yeah.
very strong opinions about Eastern thought. So, yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Raise your hand if you were taught that yoga was sinful and like invited demons into your body or breath or whatever, because that's me for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
literally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I feel like, people have kind of have probably preconceived notions coming into an episode like this, like, oh, we're going to try to get you to become a Buddhist or Hindu or adopt this or that, or, take a yoga class. And I just want to assure people that is definitely not it. We're talking more about like the philosophical underpinnings of Eastern traditions and really where it all starts, in that you are born inherently good, which is very opposite of Western religion that often starts at you are born inherently flawed. So keep an open mind. I think it's going to be a great conversation that hopefully you'll walk away with just some new things to be kind of thinking about and maybe even trying. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I definitely think it's worth listening to. And even if you think it sounds like something that maybe this isn't something you care about hearing, I think it'll be really great and really
Yeah.
helpful. And so before we get started, just a quick disclaimer, as always, we recognize that some of the topics we discuss in any episode may bring up feelings, emotions, and triggers that may require more processing or be too much to handle right now. So please always feel free to skip any episode or parts of episodes and come back if and when you are ready. Our goal is to help you trust your own body and lived experience, so take what you need and leave what you don't. All right. Well, this next segment, I always enjoy this. We will answer a couple of questions from some of our listeners.
Yeah.
So I will ask you the first question then, Laura.
Okay. Bring it on.
All right. My college made us sign a modesty contract. Is that purity culture? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Short answer. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But the more kind of pronounced answer, I would say, yeah, for sure. We've talked about purity culture is, these sets of rules that are coming from outside of us that are meant to control us, that are meant to make us adhere to a very specific standard for a very specific end goal. And so modesty contracts, I feel like in most cases, and maybe Andrew, I don't know if you've heard of this in a different way. I feel like in most cases, modesty contracts are geared towards women in particular, and they're geared kind of like the underlying motivation is that they're for men to make sure that men aren't sinning, aren't stumbling, aren't being distracted or tempted or things like that. I think that's very different than like a dress code, where maybe your office has a specific dress code, business casual, or if you go to a school that has uniforms, right? Like dress codes are very different than modesty contracts, in my opinion. So I would say that modesty contracts and anything having to do with like the policing of somebody's bodies because of what they wear is absolutely a part of purity culture. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I definitely think it's different than just a dress code. It is. I'm trying to think if I can think of any exception to what you said. I can't. I think it is. Every time I've heard a phrase like modesty contract, it has been targeted at women or girls. And yeah, at the end of the day, it may be couched in a bunch of spiritualized language, but it
Yeah.
usually is aimed at women to protect men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, which is, again, all about control and all
Yeah,
about
yeah.
making sure that you are adhering to an external standard. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's ever been a time, yeah, where I've been like, I'm so thankful for this modesty, rule, contract, whatever. I mean, I think because of the power that modesty contracts have, I definitely think it plays into grooming behaviors and it plays into things like rape culture and whatnot, where the natural kind of outflow of that, or the natural thinking of that is like, well, then I must have deserved whatever this treatment is, whether that's sexualized violence or assault or, jeering or comments or things like that, my clothes or lack of the clothes or how my clothes look on my body elicits this response, and I'm somehow responsible for that. I think that's all part of purity culture too. And so I cringe anytime there's like a modesty contract, or, sometimes what do Christian colleges call it? It's like not a covenant, but it's like like a spiritual life kind of covenant that you're making at your school to dress in a certain way. And I feel like it's not about actually protecting people. It's about, making sure that men don't stumble and lust,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can't think what it's called, but yeah, I mean, it's setting the stage so that if a man does stumble, it just establishes the precedent that he can blame the woman.
Yeah. If you haven't dressed that
regardless.
way.
So
Yeah. Don't sign those modesty contracts, y'all. Just wear what you want to wear. So, all right. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got another question. This is a good one, Andrew. We're throwing it to you first. So, what is the difference between a sexual ethic or sexual ethics and sexual shame?
So I'm not sure how I would articulate the difference, but I will say that sexual shame would inform what your sexual ethic is, and that is tied back into purity culture, these high control systems that we came out of that, very much are pathologizing of our bodies, of human sexuality. Like there's a very particular paradigm in which human sexuality is okay to be expressed or practiced. And so as far as what the difference is, I guess that I'm not totally sure what the question is, what the asker of the question was getting at, but that's where I would go with it, is that I think someone's sexual ethic can very much be informed by sexual shame, and sexual shame is usually driven. That's a central component of purity culture, and it's usually rooted in the premise that we're born bad, that your body is not good, that you cannot trust yourself, that all of those ideas.
I remember an episode with Dr. Tina Skirmer-Sellers where we were talking about purity culture, and especially in women. And she gave this definition of sexual shame. And it was actually from a student of hers doctoral work, which, I mean, I read the whole doctoral dissertation multiple times, that just proves my nerdiness. But it was a fascinating dissertation all on like, what is sexual shame, right? Because it's like we feel it in our bodies when it's there, but it's also hard to describe. And so she talks about sexual shame is a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust towards one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. And Dr. Tina's definition is even, or her more robust definition, goes on. But when I think about that, like, I definitely agree with what you're saying about how sexual shame can inform a sexual ethic. But I think a sexual ethic is more connected to, like, how do I want to show up in the world as a sexual being? And yes, that includes sexual activity and how I interact with other people. But it also can show up in the way I advocate for things, what I'm passionate about. How do I show up as a female, a male, a non-binary person, right? Like, our sexual ethic is so much more than what we do with our genitals. And so I think that when we hold a lot of sexual shame, like disgust towards ourselves, that can inform our sexual ethic. But I think they're different. But I think maybe they're, like, the asker of this question is not getting them confused, but like overcoupling them, because so often sexual shame, because of sexual shame, there's lots of rules that we will sometimes put on ourselves because we want to feel better. We don't want to feel sexual shame. And I think it's easy to say, well, sexual ethics then are the rules. Like, those are the rules that we have for ourselves, very similar to how purity culture, has quote unquote boundaries. Like, here's the things you can do. Here's the things you can't do. I think sexual ethics are much bigger than boundaries within a sexual context. But I wonder if that's kind of where they can get, like, overcoupled, and to say, it's about it's about rules of I only feel sexual shame if I'm breaking the rules. So the rules must be my sexual ethic. That's one and the same. I could be wrong, but that's how I read the question. And yeah, I'm also a big proponent of a sexual ethic being very fluid and being able to change as you change yourself. I think about like sexual activity with a partner or at different seasons of life. If we go from a purity culture boundaries standpoint, there's a specific time that you're allowed to have sex and with whom you're allowed to have sex. Whereas a sexual ethic might value things like consent, might value autonomy, might value pleasure. And how that shows up might be different based off of what you're looking for in a relationship or the amount of time you have to spend on a relationship or where you're at in your own healing journey. And so I feel like sexual ethics are so much bigger than boundaries and shame, even though that can inform them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, though. And I can see how they're tied together.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense for sure.
Yeah. All right. Good question. Keep them coming, y'all.
Kim June Johnson is an associate practitioner at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, a certified yoga therapist and somatic practitioner specializing in healing from religious trauma and CPTSD. Raised outside of religion but deeply impacted by a fear-based Christian upbringing, Kim's faith journey led her from worship leader and recording artist to a profound path of self-discovery and healing after her faith collapsed in her mid-20s.
Embracing somatic embodiment, expressive writing, and mindfulness, Kim guides clients to reconnect with their inner wisdom and build resilience through body-centered practices. Living on Canada's wild west coast, Kim draws inspiration from nature, music, and creativity, hosting community yoga classes and online writing sessions. Her work honors the tender process of reclaiming authenticity, joy, and meaning beyond religious conditioning. Welcome, Kim, to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be good. As the listeners know, we are talking about purity culture and everything that goes along with it this season. And so we've hit all sorts of different topics. And I'm really excited for this conversation because we're actually talking about purity culture through an Eastern lens, which is part of your own personal and professional backgrounds. So I'm very excited to hear more about what you have to say. But to start us off, I wonder if you can share just a little bit about your own background, because you weren't necessarily raised inside of organized religion, but you got into it and you were impacted by purity culture. And so, yeah, can you just help us make that connection of how you got to where you're at today?
I was raised inside of religion, but I had a little bit of a unique situation where my parents didn't really go to church, but they took my brother and I to church.
Interesting.
And so I started going when I was about 9. I think my mom was like kind of a lapsed Baptist, and then my dad came from a church background a little bit. So I think they both had a lot of guilt. So they took my brother and I to church. And so I grew up in it without my parents really going. So it's a little bit of a different situation. But I was definitely influenced by evangelical culture and by purity culture, which was inevitable.
So a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are from the U.S. You grew up in Canada. What did you experience of purity culture growing up in Canada? Was it the same as here in the U.S.?
You know what? It was so much the same. Every time I hear a client talk about it or hear a podcast about it, I'm like, how did it all just go around the exact same? I think the same speakers were coming up here. We definitely got I Kiss Dating Goodbye stuff up here. Super ashamed to say that I led my youth group through that at the age of 22 when I was running a youth group. I was a youth pastor and we did that whole audio program with them.
Yeah.
So I think that we just have the same resources. We have like, I don't know what you even call them now, like Christian bookstores where you sell the music and the books. And I think it was all just circulating. So we got all the same material.
Yeah.
And then of course we had the youth rallies with the speakers that would talk about waiting until marriage. And we had the Bible studies at the age of 16, where like the pastor's wife would come in and talk about how we needed to save ourselves from marriage. So I think it was just very, very prevalent.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you mind sharing what your denominational background was or is?
Yeah, was. So
Yeah.
I grew up with an alliance background, and then I went to evangelical free, which I know
Mhm.
you're familiar with, Laura.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then at the age of 16, I went to a Pentecostal, or actually it was called apostolic, which is sort of like
Mm.
Pentecostal
Mhm.
church at the age of 16, and then kind of came of age in that environment.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
denominations.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
No,
super fun because
yeah.
apostolic is like the new apostolic reformation. Are you familiar with that? And like they're super influential in the politics, like US politics.
Okay. Yeah, I
Hmm.
don't think that's a term that I've heard up here.
I'm not sure. I don't know enough. I listened to a whole podcast series about it. I don't know all of the history, but I know that they're deeply connected to like Bethel in Redding, California,
Yeah.
and everything coming out of there. And so they're,
Yeah.
yeah, deeply influential in in the political environment that the United States is currently in. So,
Yeah.
yay.
Yay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is interesting. Several different denominational backgrounds that you went through. What ultimately led you to more of like, Eastern philosophies, yoga, things like that? I'm just curious when that
Mhm.
trajectory shift started happening.
Yeah. Well, around the age of 25, I started to have a crisis of faith. And I was really like my whole life was in a community. It was a vineyard community at the time. And I was like an internationally distributed worship leader, and I was speaking in different churches around Canada and the United States. And all of my community and my marriage was in that space. And then I had a crisis of faith. And as I started to sort of talk about it out loud, I noticed, oh, wow, this is not okay. Like, I'm not getting invited to things anymore. I mysteriously disappeared from the worship team list, and friends started to pull away.
Hmm.
And so that was a defining moment for me, and things started to sort of unravel after that. And I had a baby around that time. So I was very at home, and I was really just processing this faith crisis alone. The man that I was married to at the time did not have the emotional capacity to be with that at all. So I just stopped talking to him about it too, because it made our
Yeah.
relationships really difficult.
Yeah.
And I think I just sort of bore it alone for a couple of years. And then I was in the library looking for just music and audiobooks for my daughter. And this teaching CD fell off the shelf. And I looked at it, and I had just lost my career. I had just lost a lot of things. So this audiobook was by this man named Rick Jarrow, and it was called The Ultimate Anti-Career Guide. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. It was like considering career through a mind body lens, a holistic lens. And so I
Hmm.
took it home, and he was talking about the Eastern perspective of development. So, like in the West, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is that the framework of development? And he was talking about
Yeah.
the Eastern perspective, which was called the chakra system. And as soon as he said it, I was like, everything in me bristled, because
Yeah.
messages about Eastern perspectives and the chakra system and like Buddha and all of that were so spoken out against in the religious spaces that I grew up
Yeah.
in. But he had this really kind, warm voice, and I really trusted him. So I listened, and that paradigm changed my life.
Mm.
And it was really this introduction of, I think when we're unwinding religious trauma, it's like we feel like we want to like just go in there and tweak it or like rearrange something. But he gave me this whole other experience
Mm.
to go on, like a whole
Mhm.
other paradigm. And
Yeah.
so,
That makes a lot.
yeah, so it was the chakra system, and learning about the chakra system eventually led me to study mind body practices, eventually led me to study yoga therapy. And so that's sort of how I got on that
Mhm.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's so common. I mean, I guess I can only speak for myself, but like to kind of start to tinker a little bit into some of the more Eastern religious practices and spiritual practices coming out because there's so many people that want some sort of a spiritual framework and maybe like Eastern religious practices seem to fill a need that, Western religion may have once filled. I'm curious, is there, we've talked about purity. I mean, purity is such a hot topic, essentially, in Western religion, even if they're not overtly using the word purity. Is that something that is present in some of these Eastern philosophies or yoga? Is purity part of the goal, or is it different?
Oh gosh, I mean, that is such a big topic. I guess what floats up for me is there's a different approach to that. And again, I mean, like Peter Levine talks about the way that the chakra system essentially comes at personal development from the basis that we're good.
Yeah, that's
We're
way different.
inherently good. Yeah, we're inherently good. We inherently have wholeness at our center. And according to Eastern perspectives, there's suffering in the world, but that suffering is not because of our innate badness. It's because there's also delusion. It's like we are a piece of clear glass and there's been smudges put on it by conditioning and misunderstandings. That's a totally different way to approach development. In Christianity, we came at development from the assumption that we were innately broken and that we were born with a debt owing and that we needed to, continually do things to repair that debt and sign on the dotted line, etc., with, beliefs around salvation and redemption. And the Eastern paradigm is that we have wholeness at our core. And that is a far different place to, start from.
I mean, honestly, that kind of answers some of the other questions I was even going to ask, but that just like really turns everything on its head as far as, that approach versus the traditional evangelical approach to purity culture, and just our understanding of sin, our understanding of just humanity. I mean, at its very basic core, like, for example, I was going to ask, like, how do yoga and somatic practices offer like a different framework for understanding the body, desire, or even quote sin, and what you're just saying there, like, really speaks to that. Like, it is so fundamentally different. Like, we're not perceived as being sinful at all.
And then we're also given this development method where, I have to kind of say a little bit about the chakra system, which is that it is a holistic model. And in the East and in yoga practices, there's not this separation that we're used to in the West, which is like the physical body and then the spiritual life and then, the emotional body. It's all one. So, in yoga, we understand how, you can open your arms like this and experience like stretching through the rib cage, and also like a lifting of the mood, or, an opening of the emotional heart, as well as the physical heart space. So it comes at this, it's an embodied model where there's 5 layers of the body, and there's the physical body, which is like the part of us that eats food and the part of us that needs sleep. And then there's the mental, emotional body. And then there's the energy body. And then there's something called the bliss body, which is, it's a little bit hard to pin down, but it's that, that state of flow that we sometimes find that's actually considered part of the body.
I
So
love that.
these 5 layers of the body, and they're all connected, is also just a very different starting point from the Western perspective of disconnection.
So as you work with clients, like, how do you use some of this framework, especially when we're talking about becoming embodied, kind of tackling some of the purity culture pieces or the shame from purity culture pieces? How how do you use some of these yogic practices or Eastern traditions, especially with people who might be a little bit adverse to kind of diving into a new spiritual tradition, especially one that was so, like we're taught to be like very scared of.
Yeah. I mean, I think that belief that yoga is diving into a different spiritual tradition is even like something that maybe we were taught in fundamentalist Christianity. Because I tend to just use mind-body practices that are original in yoga philosophy, but I'm not inviting anybody into a new spiritual paradigm.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of teaching about the chakra system in terms of just a human development model.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, we have a Western development model that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we don't consider that necessarily a spiritual paradigm, right? So it's more an invitation into just the Eastern perspective of human development.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
of course, there are beautiful practices and beautiful precepts that can really be resourceful for people, but I don't like to invite anyone into a new spiritual paradigm in terms of yoga.
Yeah.
So the way that I work with people is often just through breath practices that really tend to the nervous system and address the physiological calming down that happens when we change our breath. There's different things that happen. We can activate the body and activate the energy by doing, like, say, a quickened breath. And then there's, a lot of scientific studies that show, for example, an extended exhale breath, if we make the exhale longer than the inhale, that there's actually, if there was a brain scan going on at the same time as an extended exhale breath, you'd see a lot, you'd see neural pathways kind of moving away from areas like activation and hypervigilance and more toward areas of creativity, curiosity, connection. You'd see a lot happening in the physical body. The cortisol and the adrenaline would be coming down, the heart rate would be regulating. So I tend to just frame it through the physiological aspects of what movement, what breath, what belief systems can do in the physical body.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting, because so many people coming out of like evangelicalism are taught to have this very skeptical at best perspective of Eastern traditions. We're not taught that there's so many things that are incorporated in different ways that are from the Eastern tradition into Western tradition. So when you're talking about breath work, you can go onto social media and there's this breathwork teacher and this course and this whatever. And people are like, oh, this is so great. Here's this new thing. And it's like, not really. I mean, this is something that cultures and traditions have been doing for thousands of years before us. It's just marketed in a different way. And I think that, it's helpful to understand that, some of the things that are kind of bubbling up and are at the forefront of trauma therapy nowadays, like somatic experiencing and other body-based practices, these are not new. These are not new to the, just generally speaking, but we're talking about practices that have, in some cases, been hijacked and, colonized from other cultures that have had an understanding of the human body and healing way before we ever did. Yeah. And now it just happens to be that there's research behind it. But this has been used for thousands of years, before Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk ever came along,
Yeah, there's a reason these practices and these philosophies have lasted for thousands of years. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is 75 years old. And these yoga principles are thousands of years old, and they've lasted for a reason. They've been passed down through practices and through story, and because they actually work.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of the things that I found really, really helpful in terms of framing purity culture from the chakra lens is there's 7 energy centers located along the spine is how the Eastern paradigm comes at this. And they're symbolically located along the spine. And so I'm saying that to say that they're not necessarily like physically at the spine. And that's really hard to grasp because it really is a symbolic model. But anyway, all of that to say, at the base of the spine is the first chakra, and it develops between the age of 1 and 6. And the second chakra is at like right below the belly button along the spine, and it develops between the age of like 7 and 12. And then the third one is located near the solar plexus, and it develops in the teenage years, like 13 to 19. And so this, according to my teacher, Rick Jarrow, is these first 3 are the base triangle. And if we don't have the first 3 developed, then we actually aren't really able to thrive in the world. And one of the things that I love about the system is that there are birthrights attached to each chakra. So I find this to be a really powerful lens to approach religious trauma and purity culture. So the first one between the age of 1 and 6, the birthright is, I have a right to be here. And even if you just sit with that phrase, like not just the cognitive aspect of that phrase, but like the embodied sense of having a right to be here. Like, I don't know about you, but I was definitely by the age of 6 given messages about how I didn't have a right to be here, and that my being here was actually even at risk because of, I needed to sign on the dotted line and ask Jesus into my heart and get redemption, blah, blah, blah. And because I had this inherent brokenness at my core. And so my own sense, and I know this translates with other people who have grown up in religious spaces, my own sense of I have a right to be here was really compromised. And so if we're considering this as a developmental model, each area of the chakras speaks to our conditioning and our conditioning and the ways that conditioning compromised our development. So these birthrights are really powerful. So the first one is I have a right to be here. And then the second one is I have a right to feel. And I don't know about you, but I was definitely given the message that I did not have a right to feel. And that
Same.
my feelings were sinful. They were part of my broken nature. I should ignore them. I should suppress them. I should exile them. Or, like the worst would be they're a demon. I was actually working with a client not too long ago, and he was in deep grief about the loss of a family member. And he kept referring to how he was kind of a dark person. And I paused him at one point and I said, what do you mean by that you're a dark person? And he said, well, I guess I've just kind of always thought I just have this dark nature. And then he had this memory of people in his religious community coming to him and saying, you've been in this grief for a long time. You have a spirit of death over you. And let's pray against the spirit of death. And him and I both held that together and realized it wasn't a spirit of death. It was just unprocessed grief. So that is one example of how our own emotions can be really overlaid with spiritual church messages and really harmed. Like, so he was unable to meet that grief because he framed it through that lens of it's a spirit of death. Gross.
Yeah.
So different messages about how we don't have a right to feel. And then the third chakra, which is between, the ages of 13 and 16 or 18, 19, which is our teenage years. And it's like that teenage individuation energy. And the birthright for that one is I have a right to act.
Mm.
And oof, like
Yeah.
I did not grow up with that message.
Yeah.
This morning, I woke up with a song in my head, and oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like it's important just to name that this is a really big topic. Like, I was actually
Yeah.
needing to really tend to myself last night
Mm.
as I was thinking about these topics.
Mhm.
And I woke up this morning with this old chorus in my head. It's called A Pure Heart. And it's just like asking to have a pure heart so that we can please the Lord. And then
In my
another one,
head right now. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm like,
I'm
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
like, we're gonna have to sing some sort of like annoying song at the end just to get it out of our heads, like some Whitney Houston song. And the song that kind of came after that in my head was this song called I Surrender. And some of the messages in the songs that we grew up singing were appalling. So this one line that came up for me around the third chakra is, I'm giving you my dreams. I'm laying down my rights. I'm giving up my pride for the promise of new life. This idea that, we're promised something good if we just give up our rights, if we just give up our will. And that is the healing that needs to happen at the level of the third chakra. And so even just being with that phrase cognitively and somatically, I have a right to act, is so powerful. And then you notice in terms of, embodiment, you can begin to notice what comes up when you are with that embodied phrase, and to notice and bring awareness to the things that contradict that. And so the Eastern practices around the chakra system would be that we can heal these conditionings through breath into those different areas. We can heal those conditionings through mindfulness practices, through awareness of things coming up in our body around those mantras or those phrases. And as we bring awareness to these areas through a felt sense in the body there, and through those breath practices and those phrases, we can begin to bring in a different experience around the trauma that lives there.
That seems important because one of the things we've been talking about a lot in this series about purity culture is like, what is purity culture? And it's so much more than, true love weights and, abstinence pledges. It's about like aspiring to this standard outside of yourself that you have to, in order to be good or pure or right or accepted, loved, all these things. And so that can come as a result of your gender, of your race, of your class, of like your body abilities, things like that. But I am struck because what you're talking about there is all like within yourself, right? Like these are things that are inherent to you. And it makes sense that through the lens of any sort of purity culture, like those messages are directly opposed to it, And so we have to then learn how to, siphon ourselves off so that we don't act, we don't feel, we don't allow ourselves to exist. It's all about ascribing to this external standard that has been prescribed for us, essentially.
Yeah. Gabor Mate has this phrase that I love to use in client sessions. It's very, like, it really points to what we're doing in trauma work. And the phrase is, trauma at its core is essentially a disconnection from the true, genuine self. Whether it's, being in war or being physically abused or any kind of trauma. And I think you guys say this a lot here, but just defining trauma as not what happened, but what happened in our nervous system when we became overwhelmed and couldn't process that experience. For trauma at its core is a disconnection from the true, genuine self. And trauma healing is essentially a reconnection with the true, genuine self. And I think that's why I find the chakra system so helpful, because it is an embodied system of kind of a map. Like, this is what the true, genuine self is supposed to operate like. We are supposed to live like we have a right to be here. We're supposed to live like we have a right to feel. We're supposed to live like we have a right to act. And then the ones afterward are a right to love and be loved, a right to speak our own authentic truth, a right to have intuition and to experience deep seeing. And then the last one is just this right to feel like we're connected with all of life and the cosmos. Yeah. So all of these phrases that go along with the chakras are really powerful and really, they just really like hit the nail on the head in terms of what we need to repair.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so interesting too, the very first one that you said, the right to be here. And I didn't know that, coming from your background, I didn't know that was where you started, but that's so interesting because I do a lot of internal family systems is one of my approaches, parts work that I do with a lot of folks. And one of the big themes that it's not always the case, but oftentimes is the case is like this idea of permission to exist for parts that are maybe showing up in ways that we don't feel good about, that are distressing. I'm not going to say bad or any, but like that feel very overwhelming and that we feel like we don't want to feel that. We don't want that part to be there or to say that or whatever, however it's showing up. Yeah. And that just simply a permission to exist, that being a foundational piece. Like I've seen that firsthand. And so that's just so interesting hearing you describe all of that. Like, oh, wow, like that's really validating from another lens of like, okay, there is something to that is like incredibly important. If that's something you've never had before, like that's profoundly important.
Profoundly important. I have a story that I attach to each one when I run the support group at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. And the story that I have attached to that one is I was at a restaurant not too long ago, and this little 5-year-old girl was with her family on the patio. It was a cement patio. And her mom, as they were eating dinner, her mom had given her this box of chalk, colored chalk. And the little girl grabbed the chalk and she was just writing like huge M's all over the patio. And her mom was like, "Oh, you're writing M for Maya. That's great. That's beautiful." Her name was Maya. And she just was writing M's everywhere. Like that is the energy of I have a right to be here.
Yeah. I love
like, can
that.
you even just feel that in your body right now?
There's like excitement. Yeah. And wonder.
There's like a claiming of space in the world. And then there's also, for me, in my own system, this awareness of I have like a felt sense of that being suppressed, that being slammed down. And, you know, I think a message for me was, oh, that's really prideful. Oh, don't do that. Like, think about something else other than just you. You know, this message of like, you're being selfish, you're being too self-absorbed. And that energy of I have a right to be here is a little bit self-absorbed. And we're supposed to be self-absorbed. We're supposed to be in self at that level, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's part of our human development. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's holy. It's
Yeah. I remember coming home from a conference. This was years ago. And it was like a guided meditation kind of seminar, weekend long thing or whatever. And like they kept using the word deserve, like I deserve X, Y, you know, like goodness. Right. And I would always have to I'd hear have to skip that. Right. Cause I'd feel that you know, like in me because I believed that I deserved nothing. I didn't even deserve the air that I breathed, you know, and I was already out, like I had deconstructed to that point, but it speaks to what you're talking about, that root chakra with, you know, I have the right to be, which feels very similar to I deserve, like I deserve to be here essentially. And I remember at a point in my deconstruction process, I told a friend of mine, I was like, I'm, you know, deconstructing some stuff. Don't worry. I still have the same theology. Like, I don't have to give that up, you know, Calvinistic Reformed theology. And, you know, that kind of, you know, assuaged her doubts or whatever. And finally I was like, wait a second though. If the root of all of this is I deserve nothing, I deserve death, I deserve, you know, suffering, I deserve all of this, if that's where we start, then that shifts everything about how we exist in this world, how we see ourselves and other people. And And like, I finally kind of connected it after that guided meditation conference, like, oh, it's the theology piece. Like, that's at the crux of all of this. Like, if I believe that I don't even have the right to be here, then like, that's actually what needs to be addressed, you know, so that I can say, I actually do deserve the air that I breathe. Like, that's okay to want that and to believe that it's you know, it's okay for me to have it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of conversations around religious trauma, as you know. And I think that that was the biggest aha for me, is to realize it's not necessarily the way that I was treated in church. It's not necessarily the youth conferences, blah, 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 blah. It's like the inherent beliefs about our development that harmed us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I very much relate, Laura, to that, what you just said about the right to be here. And I think that like one of the things I think about often is just how words are never the truth. They're just arbitrary combinations of sound that we happen to associate with ideas. And getting attached to any one concept or verbal thought ultimately traps us. And so like, even just going into the word right, like, what does that mean? The right. And that's why when I teach this, I use the word birthright. For me, the word birthright, it's not attached to all the things that we affirmed in religion, which was like, I mean, I just said it in that song. I'm laying down my rights. We were taught that we had to lay down our rights. And so I like the word birthright because it speaks to just that we are inherently born just by the very fact of being here in the world and having breath in our lungs and having a heartbeat and having life force coursing through our system. It's a birthright of that life force. It's not like I did something to deserve it, or I'm a good person, I deserve it. It's connected to that's the birthright of our life force. Is our birthright is belonging, it's safety, it's we have a right to feel, we have a right to act.
Yeah, the I am piece.
I have, and I need to reframe that for a lot of people coming out of fundamentalist religions, because we have been given those messages about our rights.
Yeah. I was just wondering, you know, like, you kind of mentioned this a little bit too, just even in terms of those three chakras, and then, you know, what purity culture teaches us about our bodies, you know, being dangerous, being deceitful. How do some of the practices, whether it's the mantras or any of your like yoga practices, help to untangle that belief about our bodies being dangerous or deceitful or sinful even?
I think that the most powerful practice that I can offer clients is just the practice of interoception, feeling our inner body, like what's inside. So I will often lead clients or groups through a gentle body scan, and we start with our skin. Like, what does it feel like? Places where our skin meets the air, and then the places where our skin meets our clothing, and then what's inside. And I remember when I was first introduced to interoception, it's like very murky and like vague. You're like, I don't know. Of course I have an inside of my body, but like, it took me a few years after I started to go to yoga classes and study yoga to really understand the power of interoception. And the power of it is that our inner body gives us cues to what is for us and what is not for us.
Yeah.
It gives us cues to what our internal yes and our internal no is. And that affects everything in our life. And so to be able to feel the inside of the body, and then to become familiar enough with interoception to go, oh my gosh, I felt that. I felt my stomach clench when I said that phrase. Or I felt like my energy lift when I said I have a right to be here. And there's so much information there. when we can be with that interoception, I mean, then the body starts to speak and it has a lot to say. There's a lot to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then having practices after that for tending to that experience of interoceptive awareness is really where a lot of the work that I do with clients comes from. But if we can't feel what's inside, it's not accessible to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. I feel like that's such a, I mean, I've already used this phrase, but like foundational things that are so profoundly important because, like you said, if you can't feel it, and I feel like that's such a common denominator of a lot of the folks that I've seen, and even my own personal story, is just that the body was never safe to be listened to. Like, it's like, what are you feeling? Like, well, I don't know, but that's not even a question that's safe to ask, let alone what sit and try to feel an answer. Like, that's so, yeah, I don't know. I'm just sitting, just appreciating how just fundamentally different this is from what so many people would have experienced growing up in purity culture, especially in Western Christian traditions.
Yeah.
I am curious, what would you say are some of the most common ways that clients do show up in your practice carrying purity culture in their nervous systems? And not only folks who are still like maybe recently deconverting, deconstructing, or what have you, but folks who maybe have even left religion a long time ago.
When I'm with clients, I'm not being with any specific issues necessarily. We're holding space for the constriction and the expansion in the body. So what that means is I will lead someone through a somatic practice when we encounter constriction or an unpleasant feeling, and then we let that experience unfold from there. And sometimes it unfolds around purity culture, and sometimes it unfolds to something else, like, being raised by an explosive caregiver. So I don't really have an agenda when I work with people, but what I do find a lot is belief systems that could be sort of boiled down to a few different things. I'm not safe. I'm not whole. I can't take up space. I can't take up space is a big one. And those arise from, I like the phrase embodied stance, like these internalized messages that become stances in our nervous systems and in our body. And they become so habitual and so, just such an unconscious pattern that we lose track of where they came from. So a lot of my work with clients is just to be with the tension, be with the experience of constriction in the body, and then the awareness unfolds from that. But we can usually boil it down to different belief systems. And often those belief systems came from fundamentalism and from purity culture. And so often what I'm working with people is this, not necessarily like related to sex or related to genitals or related to, relationships even, but just related to like, I can take up space. I can move in a way that feels good for me. I get to listen to what feels good in my nervous system and in my body. And that can be, a lot of different things. I often get people to, when I'm first working with them, I get them to write a list of 25 or 30 things that they love. Because even connecting with what we love, what our favorite things are, puts us in direct contact with our authentic self. And so coming back to that Gabor Mate quote, trauma healing is essentially the reconnection with our true authentic self. I think that that's where I encounter a lot of messaging from purity culture, because purity culture essentially says, you don't get to be yourself. You have to be some other way. And here's the way. Sensuality is not just about touch or pleasure or intimacy with another person, but it begins inside of us. And it's the way that we listen to our body every day in different ways, getting dressed, choosing, our bedding, or whether to go for a walk or not, slowing down enough to feel deeply. And so I think that doing that work of connecting with authenticity will eventually bang us up against all the messages that came up in purity culture. And sometimes that has to do with sexual relations with someone, and sometimes it doesn't. I married a man in church, and I had been given messages about, even sexual arousal being impure. And so I had associative connections with feeling sexual arousal, and that's impure. And so my experience was that I literally exiled my sexuality for years, like just shoved it over here and didn't feel it. It's amazing how you can do that.
Yeah.
And so for me, like the way that I reclaimed that in my own life was I moved to a beautiful little community, and I went walking in the trees, and I went swimming in the ocean, and I, laid out under the stars and watched stars. And I connected with my own experience of sensuality. And for me, the word sensuality is really just like that inner yes to life.
Yeah.
And so that can have, that can be related to sex or not. And so for me to reconnect with my own sensuality had to do with reconnecting with nature. And then, a lot unfolds after that when you begin to reclaim your own authentic experience of pleasure in that regard.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because, when I've worked with clients in the past, around pleasure or, be just like intimacy, connection with themselves or whatnot, it's so closely associated with sex and sexual activity with another person. And it can become something that they feel very resistant towards because of what's coming up for them in their body, whether that's literal pain or anxiety or whatever it might be. And so often, like the reconnection with self and pleasure, intimacy, sensuality, it has to be uncoupled first from sex and sexuality. That's like one way that you might be able to experience pleasure or connection. But ultimately, if you're not connected to yourself and knowing what you love is kind of what I'm hearing you say, then it almost doesn't matter. Like what you do with other people, because it still is going to have an internal disconnect. Am I kind of hearing that right?
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like it's important to say that, like, I would have to say for myself, this is one of those things that I'm still unwinding. I have 2 kids, and so that are just recently grown. So I made the choice for myself that I wasn't going to invite a relationship into my beautiful life with my daughters. So it was something like even just the sexual aspect of purity culture. It was something that I didn't really get to explore. And as I mentioned, it was something I really exiled. And so for me, like I often find myself banging up against things around this. And what I sort of recently became aware of is that, like, often when we're working with these overcouplings of pleasure and sexual shame, the way that you can do that is through just noticing the constriction in your body and like being with the tension in the body and letting that tension soften, and then something releases. And recently when I was being with something that came up around that, what arose in that process, and like literally practically it was like grab a blanket and like shove it up against yourself and just like soften into that tension until it resolves or until it releases in that moment. And what came up for me in this one session was, oh, sexual wounds are often relational wounds. And when I studied somatic attachment therapy, what you begin to learn is that if there's a sexual wound or, with another person, then it can really only be healed in relationship. And that was really jarring for me to notice, because I think because I have 2 kids and I haven't invited a relationship into my life, I've been trying to heal purity culture damage alone. And so I think that finding a safe partner to explore these relational wounds with is ultimately something that needs to happen. And then what came up for me around that was, that's really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Really hard.
To find someone who's like trauma informed enough and like open enough to be able to be with that. And so I guess I'm bringing that up just to say that, wow, it's a really big subject. And it's like, I feel like we could be unwinding this in ourselves for really our whole life.
Yeah.
From the terrible messaging of shame and brokenness that we were given in our developmental years. And our developmental years are where we're forming those patterns and we're forming those embodied stances. And embodied stances are ways that we turn to meet the world, or, ways that we take in the world. And so, so damn it, like, development matters.
Shame is so isolating. And what you just said there, like we're shamed for things and we are taught to internalize that. I think it was Hillary McBride that said, like, shame starts from the outside, but eventually kind of becomes internalized. And shame is so isolating. When we feel terrible about ourselves, like the last thing we want to do is expose that to somebody else. And then you add on top of that, this culture of high control religion where making a mistake is actually seen as sinful, or not performing in a certain way could potentially have eternal consequences.
Right.
And so then we do like turn everything inwards, and that shame just festers and grows. And yet we're relational beings. I believe that we are created as relational beings, meant to be in relationship with one another. But that then feels like incredibly scary, especially when we're, talking about healing from trauma and purity culture. Why would we want to lean into relationships when we've been harmed in relationships? And yet, like, I know that sometimes temporary withdrawal is necessary. Like, we need a minute to get our feet back on the ground and, recenter ourselves. But there comes a point where we have to be able to invite other people into that in order to actually experience the fullness, I think, of healing. And that's scary. It's really scary. It's really hard, because you're probably going to get hurt again, but that's part of the process of healing in the context of relationships.
Yeah. One of my favorite phrases about shame is by Anais Nin. Shame is the lie that someone told you about yourself.
Ooh. Yeah.
And for me, it harkens back to those birthright phrases. Like just bringing in a different statement that feels better in the body.
Yeah.
It speaks to yoga traditions have this word called samskaras. And samskaras are deep, like they're translated, it's like a deep impression. Samskaras are subtle impressions left by thoughts, actions, and experiences that shape our habits, behaviors, and perceptions. And they actually live, according to Eastern tradition, they live in the body, in the mind body. And they examples, I guess 3 categories of examples of samskaras are automatic thoughts, like self-criticism, habitual responses or emotional reactions,
Mm-hmm.
and ingrained belief systems. And all of this lives in the body. And according to Eastern tradition, we can move these through movement, through breath, through meditation, through even, dancing.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard that term. I think it was in Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul.
Oh,
And he
yeah, I love
talks
that.
about it. And I remember immediately thinking like, oh, this is like interojection in fundamentalism, right? Where we have these messages that come in from the external and then we embody them. And
Yeah.
believe that they're coming from inside of ourselves, and so often it's relationships that bring that out, that show us where they are so deeply embodied, and then offer us the opportunity to have those corrective experiences.
Correct.
Yeah, in order to keep moving forward, whatever that looks like.
I think where I was going with that was we were talking about shame and how shame is the lie that someone told you about yourself.
Yeah.
And so we internalize these lies. I don't know if you've ever heard Peter Levine talk about toxic shame, but it's this idea that when we're children, if we have a caregiver who doesn't have it together, who's emotionally explosive, or maybe like an alcoholic, or just not taking care of us, it's too dangerous for our nervous systems to tell the truth about that experience and go, my mom is like, she's losing it, or my dad is not kind. He's not a kind person. It's too dangerous for our nervous systems to name that accurately, even though we sometimes see it accurately. And so what we do in order to keep our nervous systems feeling safe with our caregivers is we take that and we turn it inward and we say, there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I find that so fascinating because Peter Levine is talking about childhood development. But I think that we did that when we grew up in purity culture around, ways that we were taught to relate to ourselves and to the world sexually. We probably, I think that I can remember sitting in a space when I was 14 and going, this doesn't sound right. And yet, if we're in a religious environment where we find belonging and we find, so much, it's too dangerous for our nervous systems to go, that's bullshit. Because we're 14. We're 14. And if we, listen to our fight and we ran away or we fought it off, we wouldn't have that belonging. We wouldn't have our youth group. We'd lose friends. We'd probably be shamed in that space. And so we turn it inward on ourselves. And I think that becomes a samskara.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. I mean, because truly that is like, I think the culture's, I don't want to make too much of a generalization, but I think everybody who grew up in Western Christianity, evangelicalism especially, has that. And what I mean is just simply that, I mean, literally just the notion of being sinful and needing to be saved, like the problem is internal and the only solution to it is external. And it just, I mean, it's just from the very ground up, it's this messaging of, even if it's just implicit, but this messaging of you cannot trust yourself. Like your body is not trustworthy. It is not good. And it runs deep.
It runs so deep because, I mean, essentially, that question is so prickly, right? I mean, I think you were saying this before, but like, if we really turn to face that question, we essentially have to reframe what Christianity is. We have to reframe what Jesus, stands for. And that is so huge and so scary for so many people.
Right.
The roots of this just run so deep.
Yeah. I just appreciate this whole conversation because, I mean, it has, I mean, I guess this is a good thing. This is the whole point of becoming more embodied. It's like I've just been kind of just sitting with a lot of it, just like thinking, processing, like, rather than like rapid fire questions, which I feel like in a podcast where you're more prone to do that because that's kind of what a podcast is, but no, it is just a lot to think about. Well, yeah, there are some of like some of the wrap up questions that we do. We ask a lot of folks kind of this question, and I'd love to ask you, and that's simply if you could go back and say one thing to your younger self who was starting to internalize these fear-based messages about body and spirit, what would that be?
I mean, I wish I could go back and say, hey, babe, if it feels bad, if you're tight and constricted, that thing is not for you. But then I take that a step further and go, wow, the cost of listening to that advice would be so big.
Yeah.
I would have lost belonging. And also, a big part of needing church when you're coming of age is that you aren't getting what you need in your family. A big piece of when I'm working with clients, a big piece of reckoning with religious trauma is noticing, oh, it was so resourceful because I grew up with emotionally immature caregivers. And that is another hard reckoning to make peace with the fact that you weren't given tools, you weren't given skills. And so you needed all the skills found in religion. And a lot of the skills found in religion were, for emotionally regulating, were you feel scared, read your Bible. You feel insecure in the world, oh, you need to like plug into Jesus more. Right. They were all related to being in that world. And so that's one of the most difficult things of leaving that space is we have to learn new tools for being with our emotions and relating to the world. And so on one hand, that's what I would tell her. And on the other, I know that she couldn't have done that. Yeah. She essentially needed that space. She needed that community at the time. And so I guess the advice I would give her is like, stay as long as you need it, and then as soon as you're ready, just run.
Yeah.
Get out
good.
Get out faster.
Yeah.
So long.
Yeah.
Don't wait so long. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a very vivid memory of like this moment where I was like, I can keep asking these questions. I think I was 19, maybe 20 at the time. And I was like, I can keep asking these questions. And if I do that, I will lose everything. I don't think I'm ready to.
Yeah.
And so I will kind of actively turn my eyes, my mind, everything away to something else. And I will keep following this path, of rigid fundamentalism, until I can be okay with losing everything. And I know that I'm not going to fall on my face, which, not shockingly was like, as soon as I got my master's degree and had a career that could like allow me to move anywhere, But I mean, there's such a cost that goes with it. And so there's like that compassion that you have to have, not like, why didn't you leave sooner? But like, good job for staying as long as you needed to, and then get the hell out of there, the moment that you feel like you're ready.
Yeah, I relate to that, Laura. Like, I think I wasn't ready until I was married and had a newborn baby. And then I finally was able to feel like I had a container for my own life and I didn't need the container of church.
That's huge. Yeah.
And then I was able to feel safe enough to put that at risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember before that, as you just said, like there was a mentor in my life. And early on, I was always the kind of kid that asked the questions in the Sunday school class and I'd be like really annoying. And I remember the teacher just like getting really impatient at me, like, can't you just accept that this is how it is? And I remember early on one of my Sunday school teachers, her name was Frances. She came to me and she said, Kim, sometimes what I like to do is when there's a question that comes up and I just don't understand it, just imagine that you could like set it over here on a shelf and just say, God, I'm going to put this on the shelf and I'm going to trust you to work it out in your timing. And that was actually really helpful. It was helpful for my nervous system to be able to just put it on the shelf. But my experience of my crisis of faith was literally that the shelf was like trembling and couldn't hold any more of those questions, right? So it just kind of started to topple.
Yeah. Well, when that's the only coping mechanism you have, which, I mean, brilliant. But then, at some point, it's like, too many questions. Yeah.
Coping mechanism not working anymore.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I'm curious to know as we wrap up, we're talking about a different way here to navigate the impacts of purity culture and religious trauma. And I love this lens that we're working through because it, I think it takes away some of the fear that people might have about Eastern traditions, right? Where they think, oh, you just have to meditate all day, every day, and then, you'll be fine or whatever it is. And I feel like I see so much of this on social media and it's like, this is all Eastern practices, right? But to that end, I wonder if there's any hope that you find from a conversation like this or seeing people starting to tune into their bodies and using breath work and things like that. They're recovering from trauma as we're healing from purity culture. What is the hope that you take away from a conversation like this?
Yeah, I think that what I'm seeing right now in our culture is like less rigidity around religious beliefs. I read a book called Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Experience by Sharon Salzberg years ago. And she shares this analogy to describe what happens when we allow fixed beliefs to shape reality for us. And she has this great metaphor. She likens it to, she says, gazing at the sky through a straw. And the sky is the unobstructed truth of who we are and what our lives are about. And when we receive belief systems that monitor or control that for us, it's as if we are looking at the sky through a narrow tube, seeing only a very small part of it, while we're convinced that we're actually seeing the whole.
Yeah.
So I think that what I'm seeing is this like less rigidity around fixed beliefs. And that allows us to have a direct experience of our life rather than a conceptual experience of our life. Like kind of going back to something I said earlier, which was that words are never the truth. They're just arbitrary combinations of sound. And getting attached to any concept, any verbal thought ultimately traps us. And so if we're attached to concepts and words, we're not having a direct experience of what we're in. And I'm really seeing like a breakthrough in that way. People willing to take the words off, willing to take the labels off and just go, what is this? Like, take the word purity culture off. What is it? Take the word shame off, even. Like, what is there? It's often just constriction in the body, some sort of constriction in the body. And then we can be with that constriction in a somatic way. We can move it. We can shift it. We can tend to it. We can not shame it. We can relate to it. And that is, in all of the new studies around trauma, that's where healing happens.
Yeah, very much agreed.
Yeah.
Wow. There's a lot to think about. And it feels so hopeful when you say it that way. I know sometimes our own fear gets in the way and makes us want to dig our heels in even more to quote unquote what we know or like the certainty, which is why fundamentalism has such an appeal, or at least the illusion of an appeal. But when we let it kind of work its way through our bodies, it doesn't always feel great, but it opens us up to that healing like you're talking about. And it loses a little bit of its like fear or a little bit of its hold on us that allows us to keep moving forward, and we don't have to cling on to these external things to be okay, right? Like we create the okay, essentially.
I think that's something that Eastern practices and yoga specifically really offers in terms of this conversation about what you just said, how it can be hard and it can be scary. Because I think that we're so disconnected from what even emotional pain is in our culture. And yoga gives this paradigm of, like, there's this acronym, BRFWA, BRFWA. And it's a way of being with difficult experiences in the body. And so it stands for breathe, relax, feel, watch, allow. And so just kind of, you know, if you had, you know, having a terrible night, even just imagine, like, you're just like, you're feeling super dysregulated. So just to pause and like bring in some supports. Here's my blanket. And breathe, relax, feel, watch, allow. Yoga teaches that a difficult experience is actually just a really strong sensation in the body. And what makes it hard is the stories that we attach to that experience. And that was mind-blowing for me to realize that what was making me suffer was the stories that I was adding to the experience. And that goes back to that idea that we have in like wholeness at our core. And there's suffering in the world, but the suffering comes from the delusion. The suffering comes from the stories we tell about the experience. And so even just kind of bringing it down to the thumbnail of a single difficult experience, if we breathe, relax, feel, watch, allow it, and let the stories, you know, float away, or notice when there's stories and not attached to the stories, it's actually not that hard to be with. That's what's so wild about it. If it's just sensation, it's just sensation. It's a strong sensation. It might be, you know, really a painful sensation, but when we can be with just the sensation without the story, that's where all the gold is. For processing this stuff.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, same. And I agree entirely. It's been a lot of some of my big pivotal moments, both in terms of my own healing, but also as a therapist, coach, all of the things, is realizing just how important somatic and embodiment work is compared to using simply a cognitive lens. And not trying to take this opportunity to dunk on CBT, but I guess maybe I am a little bit anyway. It's just so limited, because essentially what you're doing is you're just trying to change the stories, but you're still not willing to sit with what your body is feeling. And it's like, that might work a little bit, maybe, but at the end of the day, if you're not able to be curious and notice what's happening in your body and sitting with that, with even an ounce of compassion, it's like, it's just a matter of time before it shows up again. And you are then dysregulated again.
Some of my clients and I that, you know, when I've been working with BRFWA with them for a long time, we just say, BRFWA the shit out of that. BRFWA the shit out of that. And
that.
When you BRFWA the shit out of something, then you start to notice, oh, here's what's standing in the way of me BRFWAing the shit out of this. I'm talking to myself in a really mean way right now. Or I have this really strong story that like keeps imposing itself on this experience of feeling my emotions. And we can notice so much about what we overlay on top of our direct experience.
That's
and
huge.
again, that's where the gold is for healing. It brings so much awareness around our patterns and around our belief systems and around even like memories. When I'm with a client and we're BRFWAing the shit out of something, often we notice barriers to doing that, to just being with it. And those barriers are like, hey, let's work with that now. You know, thanks nervous system for like revealing this.
Yeah.
Because now
Yeah,
we get to be
that's
with it
huge.
together
Yeah.
and resolve it. Yeah.
I love that. We're going to have to put that in the show notes so that people can, you know, clip that, use that acronym and start practicing it in their own lives. Cause I mean, I know it takes some time to get into that, to get used to that pattern, but I feel like the more you do it, it's not that it always becomes easy, but it becomes tolerable. And so you go, okay, I know there's an end to this. Like, I'm not going to keep feeling this way all the time, but I can work my way through it so that it starts to resolve and doesn't have like the hold on me that it used to.
Well, I mean, I've been working with this for a long time, and sometimes even me, and I work with clients, and I've been doing this for a long time. Sometimes, I mean, the other day this happened to me. I was like, why do I feel like I'm 12 years old right now? Oh, because the 12-year-old part is showing up, and like, it feels so terrible. And then I have to go, what am I supposed to do with this again? Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be this. Like, I don't know how many times I'm going to have to remind myself about that. So,
Yeah. I mean, that just goes to show like how trained we are to immediately make a story out of it, you know, in order to try to like think our way through it and figure it out logically so then it's going to quote unquote be better. When in reality, it's like actually that the meaning we make out of it is actually probably last. We don't need to necessarily make meaning yet. We need to work through it and see what happens in our bodies. At least that's my perception.
I was in a theater production or a theater troupe for a long time. And on opening night for one of our plays, this visiting coach came in and he was leading us through warm-ups for opening night. And he said something that totally changed my life. He said, I want you to notice that nervousness is just excitement with constriction added to it.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, what? Like, so constriction changes the experience of an emotion?
That makes
And
sense. Yeah.
after that, I was like, what else is something different with constriction added to when constriction is added to it? And I realized a lot of stuff. And I started to play with my grief and my regret and chronic sadness and started to notice, wow, if I can unconstrict around this, emotions actually change to something else. I had a really profound experience soon after that of just being with sadness. And as I unconstricted around that sadness, what I found underneath was like just a profound tenderness of being alive. I was like, what?
Wow. Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah. And unconstricting around, you know, something like regret. What I found underneath was like just present moment potential to just act now, from now, moving forward instead of looking back. So even just that practice of unconstricting around emotion doesn't change just the experience in our bodies, but it changes the story we have about that experience.
That's huge. Oh, I love that. It feels like such a hopeful kind of note to end on. I mean, I think there's so many more things that we could go into, and this is so good, you know, right? Like, yeah, this is so good. But for sake of time for everybody, and I want to be respectful to your time too, we'll kind of wrap up. And this is like a great way. Like, if you want to work with Kim, you should do, like, if this conversation is, you know, interesting and piquing your curiosity and wanting to do more, where can people kind of find you, Kim? Can they work with you? You know, follow your work? Where is all of that?
Yeah, they can find me at healingground.ca, which is my website. I have a Substack called Braving the Open Sky.
Ooh,
I run support groups and do one-on-one coaching for religious trauma at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. And on my Instagram page, which is healing.ground.embodiment, I have a little mini course on using the chakras to heal religious trauma.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. And we'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes so that people can find you.
Awesome.
I just feel like this has been such an illuminating conversation, and I appreciate I appreciate remembering how many of the things that I use with clients are actually rooted back in some of these Eastern philosophies.
true.
And I
Yeah.
feel like it's just so important to like honor that, and instead of what us Americans love to do by co-opting everything, like just be like, yeah, this is actually it's so body focused, like we have what we need to heal ourselves inside of us. And it goes back to that definition of healing, returning to your authentic self, your sense of goodness. And that's what I'm taking away from today. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you and everything that you've brought to this conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for the work that
Yeah.
you guys do too. I'm such a fan of
Thanks.
this podcast. It's great to
Yeah.
Thank
do
you.
and see what you guys.
Fun little thing to get to do, hit purity culture from all the different angles,
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Can't wait.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you again, Kim, for joining us today. And yeah, people go find Kim, work with her, look at her course, follow Substack, all the things.
Thanks again to Kim Johnson for joining us on the podcast today. Yeah, we had a really great conversation. I really just appreciate her taking the time to, sit down and talk with us for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I know she kind of mentioned Peter Levine's name, and I know we've said it many times on this podcast before, but like, she talked about what Gabor Mate's kind of definition of healing is. Peter Levine's definition of healing is close to that. It's like this idea of coming back to your inherent goodness, which I feel like is so central to what we were talking about today, and just really is so anti-fundamentalism, right? Like this idea that we have inherent goodness in us. And I'm so hopeful that people can not only take that away, but see how some of these Eastern philosophies and traditions are actually, not the things to be scared of that we are taught, but actually can be so healing. And it doesn't even have to be that you're switching from one spirituality to another. It's more just using the essence of what these practices are to recognize that you are whole unto yourself, and you don't need an external authority coming in and telling you otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is so interesting because I remember hearing about just being warned about Eastern, mindfulness practices, or just the religion as a whole, or yoga. For yoga was a big one. This is like 20, 25 years ago, like when everybody was like freaking out about it. And yeah, I mean, we were told very directly that it is demonic.
Yeah.
Stay away from it. Even in the world of therapy, like I can speak for my Adventist denominational background. There's a very prominent doctor, and I don't know if he's like psychology or what. He does a lot of mental health stuff. And he very, very much only recommends CBT and not anything that's embodiment. And it's so interesting because when you realize that you are in fact good, so much of the power that these high control fundamentalist systems have over you, it just disintegrates. So it would make sense that they would not want you believing that about yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then they lose control, and we know they love control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do love their control.
Yeah. I love it. Well, everybody, I just want to encourage you to go and follow Kim. Check out the show notes. If you're interested in working with her, she's taking on clients. She's got her Substack. If you want to continue this conversation with her, follow her social media and get a hold of her. Kim does incredible work. And if you're on the fence, thinking, should I do it? Should I not? I totally think you should. I think you should work with Kim. So she's awesome. I love it. All right. Well, I think this is the end of another great episode. So with that, all God's people said, Amen.